Kevin Keegan was one of football's most loved figures. The smile, the passion, the endless energy. He gave everything for every badge he wore. To supporters, King Kev was honest, emotional, and impossible to dislike. But behind that smile was a man who never forgot betrayal. He could accept losing, he could forgive rivals, but he struggled to forgive people who broke his trust. Years before his death, Kevin Keegan was asked about Mike Ashley. His reply was simple: "No, I'm not going to take a compliment from Mike Ashley." Those few words said everything. Some wounds never healed, and they weren't about losing football matches. They were about broken promises, broken trust, and respect that could never be repaired. Managers, executives, even some of the biggest names in football left scars that stayed with Kevin for decades. Subscribe now and help keep the legacy of football's greatest legends alive. Today, we're looking beyond the goals, beyond the trophies, and beyond the famous moments. Because the story you're about to hear isn't about Kevin Keegan's greatest victories. It's about the moments that changed the way he looked at football forever. When Kevin Keegan signed for Southampton in 1980, few people expected it. The reigning European Footballer of the Year had chosen a club built on belief rather than trophies. The man who convinced him was Lawrie McMenemy. At first, there was genuine respect. McMenemy even called Keegan the best professional I have ever worked with. But football can change relationships quickly. As Southampton's progress stalled, the trust between the two men began to disappear. Years later, Keegan revealed the moment that stayed with him. He believed McMenemy questioned his commitment and suggested Southampton's players had not been honest in their performances. For Kevin Keegan, that wasn't just criticism. It was an attack on the one thing he valued most: his integrity. He had built his entire career on effort, running until he had nothing left, playing through pain, giving supporters everything he had. Looking back, Keegan admitted, "That hurt me more than anything." McMenemy always insisted their split was simply a football decision, but Keegan never remembered it that way. More than 3 decades later, he was still talking about that pain. That tells you everything. The first scar wasn't left by an enemy. It was left by a man Kevin Keegan once trusted. The next story would be even more personal. Brian Clough was called a genius, a serial winner, one of England's greatest managers. Most people remembered the trophies. Kevin Keegan remembered something else. Years after Clough's retirement, Keegan finally spoke about the side of him that had always troubled him. In his autobiography, he criticized what he believed was Clough's habit of humiliating players. For decades, football had celebrated it. Many simply called it man management. Keegan never did. To him, leadership wasn't about making players afraid. It was about making them believe in themselves. That was the football Kevin Keegan loved. He respected greatness, but he never believed success gave anyone the right to belittle another person. As more former players shared stories of Clough's harsh methods, Keegan felt his opinion had been justified. The trophies remained. So did Clough's legendary status. But in Keegan's eyes, some victories came at too high a human cost. That disappointment never disappeared, because for Kevin, character mattered just as much as winning. The next man wouldn't hurt him from the touchline, he would hurt him from inside his own football club. Kevin Keegan returned to Newcastle because he believed he could rebuild the club he loved. Instead, he discovered he wasn't really in control. One name kept appearing: Tony Jimenez, a businessman with growing influence over Newcastle's transfer business. Then came the arguments. Keegan wanted players he trusted. Others were making different decisions. The biggest flashpoint: Ignacio Gonzalez. Keegan didn't want the signing, yet the deal happened anyway. Later, Keegan revealed another moment that stunned him. He said Tony Jimenez had dismissed Luka Modric because he was considered too small for English football. Football would prove otherwise. Modric became one of the greatest midfielders of his generation. Years later, Keegan reflected on the situation. He once said, "If you're the manager, you have to manage." To Kevin, those weren't just words. They were a principle. A football manager had to make football decisions, not watch someone else make them. Tony Jimenez denied Keegan's version of events. He insisted Keegan himself had rejected talented players. The truth became a battle of memories. But one fact could not be disputed. An independent arbitration tribunal later ruled that Kevin Keegan had been constructively dismissed. For Keegan, that decision confirmed what he had felt all along. The Newcastle he loved was slipping away, and the next man would become the face of that heartbreak. Dennis Wise had been a fighter on the pitch. At Newcastle, he became Kevin Keegan's biggest source of frustration. Wise was appointed executive director of football. From the beginning, their roles were never truly clear. Keegan believed the manager should choose the players. Wise believed recruitment was a shared responsibility. The disagreement grew with every transfer window. Then came Ignacio Gonzalez. Keegan made it clear he didn't want the signing, but the player arrived anyway. For Kevin, that was the moment everything changed. Years later, he reflected, "I wasn't prepared to be a head coach." He hadn't returned to Newcastle to stand on the touchline, while someone else built the team. The dispute eventually reached an independent arbitration tribunal. Its conclusion was devastating for the club. The panel ruled that Kevin Keegan had been constructively dismissed. It found that his authority over transfers had been fundamentally undermined. Wise always rejected the suggestion that he had forced Keegan out. He defended his actions. But for Kevin, the damage had already been done. The trust was gone. The Newcastle dream was dying in front of him. Mike Ashley gave Kevin Keegan hope. Then, he took it away. When Keegan returned to Newcastle, he believed the owner wanted to restore the club's identity. Instead, he slowly realized he had become a manager without real authority. Every disagreement led back to one man, Mike Ashley. As the transfer battles grew worse, Keegan felt abandoned. The owner never stepped in. He allowed the power struggle to continue until there was nothing left to save. After leaving Newcastle, Keegan rarely hid his feelings. When asked years later about Ashley's praise, his answer was immediate. "No, I'm not going to take a compliment from Mike Ashley." It wasn't anger spoken in the heat of the moment. Thousands of Newcastle supporters stood by him. Many believed he had fought for the club, while others fought for control. Mike Ashley always defended his ownership and denied wrongdoing. But Kevin never changed his view. Some disappointments fade. This one never did. Because the deepest betrayal is the one that comes from the place you always called home. As the years passed, Kevin Keegan became quieter. He stepped away from management. The interviews became fewer. The headlines faded. But certain memories never did. He could forgive mistakes. He could accept defeat. What he struggled to accept was losing trust. Looking back on his career, Keegan once said, "You can't manufacture trust." Those weren't empty words. They explained almost every decision he made, whether it was Liverpool, Hamburg, Newcastle, or England. Relationships always mattered more than power. Many of the men he disagreed with defended their own actions. Some said football had simply changed. Others insisted they had done nothing wrong. Keegan never launched personal campaigns against them. He simply refused to rewrite his own memories. The people he trusted stayed close to him. The people who broke that trust never truly returned. Because for Kevin, success was never measured only by trophies. It was measured by the people you could still look in the eye when football was over. And perhaps that is why those old wounds remained open, long after the final whistle. In his final years, Kevin Keegan quietly stepped away from football. Public appearances became rare. Many supporters wondered why. Then came the heartbreaking truth. Keegan had been battling cancer. His family chose to keep the illness private. On 20th of July 2026, Kevin Keegan passed away. He was 75 years old. His family said he died peacefully, surrounded by those he loved. Football stood still. Liverpool remembered a European Cup winner. Hamburg remembered the player who transformed their club. Newcastle remembered the man who gave them hope. Outside St James's Park, scarves, flowers, shirts, and handwritten tributes appeared within hours. Many simply read, "Thank you, King Kev." Supporters also remembered the line that became part of football history. "I would love it if we beat them. Love it." It was more than a famous quote. It was Kevin Keegan. Passionate, honest, unforgettable. For all the people he never truly forgave, they never defined his legacy. The supporters did. Because when football said goodbye, it wasn't mourning a former manager, it was mourning one of the game's most loved figures. Subscribe for more stories about the legends who shaped football and whose legacy will never be forgotten.